Hey guys, tonight we are going to pack our bags metaphorically, of course, and travel back to the American Wild West of the 1870s. But we're skipping the Hollywood version with its dashing heroes on noble quests. Instead, we're going to experience the West as you, an ordinary person, likely would have. And, let's be honest, the real version is so full of discomfort, boredom, and bad smells that you probably wouldn't last today. It's the perfect, unexciting backdrop to help you drift off. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're listening from tonight, so drop your city and the current time in the comments below. It's always nice to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It all starts with a piece of paper. You're sitting in a stuffy, crowded boarding house in Street Louis, a city that feels like the very edge of the known world. The air is thick with the smell of coal smoke, damp wool, and the faint, ever-present odor of the nearby stockyards. It's here, in this gray, noisy reality, that you find the pamphlet. Its cheap paper feels flimsy in your hands, but the words printed on it are anything but. They paint a picture of a promised land, a veritable Eden, just waiting for you out west. The pamphlet speaks of California, or the Oregon Territory in glowing terms. It promises land so fertile, you can practically watch the corn grow in there, so pure, it can cure the consumption. It whispers of gold nuggets lying in riverbeds, just waiting to be picked up, and vast, open spaces where a person can truly be free. This wasn't just idle fantasy, this was a coordinated marketing campaign. Railroad companies, land speculators, and even the government itself were churning out this kind of promotional material, a practice historians now call boosterism. They needed people to move west, to buy land, to use the new railroads, and to build towns. Your dream was their business model. You read the words again, and the seed of an idea begins to sprout in your mind. Life here isn't what you'd hoped. Your job is monotonous. Your prospects are dim, and you share a room with 3 other people whose snores are a nightly symphony of despair. The West, according to this pamphlet, is the answer. It's a chance to start over, to build something of your own, to breathe clean air, so you make the decision. You're going. The first crack in this beautiful fantasy appears when you visit an outfitter's store. It's a cavernous, dusty warehouse piled high with everything a westbound traveler could possibly need, and the sheer volume of it is overwhelming. The grizzled man behind the counter hands you a list. It's not a suggestion, it's a requirement. For a family of 4 to cross the plains, the list recommends at least 800 pounds of flour, 200 pounds of lard, 100 pounds of sugar, and 60 pounds of coffee. Then, there's the salted bacon, the dried beans, the tools, the spare axle for the wagon you haven't even bought yet, a heavy rifle you barely know how to hold, and a bewildering assortment of pots, pans, and buckets. As you stare at the list, the romantic image of riding into the sunset is replaced by the logistical nightmare of hauling a small grocery store across a continent. The cost is staggering. You sell nearly everything you own, gather your meager savings, and it's still barely enough. The outfitter, with a knowing look, also pushes a few bottles of Dr. Abernathy's Prairie Tonic on you. The label claims it can cure everything from snakebite to cholera to general weariness. This is a classic bit of Wild West weirdness, the proliferation of patent medicines. Most were a little more than flavored alcohol, molasses, and occasionally something much more potent. But in an era with little access to real doctors, people clung to these dubious promises in a bottle. You stand there, your life savings converted into a pile of barrels, sacks, and you're on misery. A wave of doubt washes over you. You look out the store's grimy window at the muddy street, at the other hopefuls haggling for oxen, their faces a mixture of excitement and raw fear. You are now part of a great migration, a living piece of a question that historians still debate. What was the primary driver of this massive movement? Was it the economic pull of opportunity and the promise of freedom and under the Homestead Act, or was it the push of desperation from the crowded, industrialized East? A safety valve for social and economic pressure, the academic consensus leans towards a complex mix. But for you, right now, it feels less like a grand historical force and more like a terrible, irreversible, and very expensive mistake. The pamphlet promised a new life, but it conveniently forgot to mention the price of admission. And as you try to figure out how you're going to get all this stuff onto a wagon, you have a sinking feeling that you've just been sold a very, very difficult dream. Somehow, you manage it. You purchase a wagon as sturdy, canvas-topped vehicle known as a prairie schooner, which sounds far more romantic than it is. It's essentially a wooden box on wheels. You also acquire a team of oxen, not horses. Horses are faster, flashier, and better for Hollywood movies, but they're also fragile. They can't survive on the tough prairie grass and require expensive grain. Oxen are slow, stubborn, and profoundly unglamorous, but they are hardy survivors. They are the diesel trucks of the 1872s, and they are now your responsibility. Getting them hitched to the wagon each morning is a confusing, frustrating rodeo of ropes, yokes, and guttural commands you don't yet know. And then you're off. You join a long, snaking line of other wagons, a wagon train, lumbering west out of the bustling staging grounds. The first thing that hits you isn't the sense of adventure. It's the noise, a constant, grinding symphony of creaking axles, rattling pots and pans, the lowing of cattle, and the sharp cracks of whips echoing down the line. The second thing that hits you is the dust. It's kicked up by hundreds of hooves and dozens of wheels, a fine, choking powder that coats everything: your clothes, your face, your food, the very air you breathe. You quickly learn to tie a bandana over your nose and mouth, not as a fashion statement, but as a basic survival tool. Your life is now dictated by a brutally simple and unchanging routine. You wake before dawn. In the cold, damp air, you choke down a quick breakfast of coffee and hardtack of flour and water biscuits so durable it could probably stop a bullet. You help yoke the oxen, and then you start walking. Yes, walking. The image of a family relaxing inside the gently swaying wagon is a myth. The wagons are packed to the brim with supplies, leaving no room for passengers. More importantly, the ride inside is excruciating. The upsmudge axles transmit every jolt from every rock and rut directly into the passenger's bones. Your spine has become personally acquainted with every single bump between Missouri and Nebraska. So, you walk. You walk beside the wagon, hour after hour, under the blazing sun. The average pace of a wagon train is a blistering 2 miles per hour. Your entire world has slowed to the speed of a strolling ox. The scenery, which you imagined would be majestic and varied, quickly becomes a monotonous, rolling ocean of grass. The same green-brown hills greet you day after day. The only change comes from the roadside attractions, which are grim and sobering. The Oregon Trail is not a pristine wilderness, it's a well-worn highway, littered with the debris of those who came before you. You see broken wagon wheels, splintered crates, and, most poignantly, abandoned furniture. A heavy oak rocking chair sits forlornly on the prairie, a silent testament to someone's discarded dream of a comfortable home. A little further on, the cast iron stove, its former owner having finally realized that its weight was a death sentence for their exhausted oxen. This trailside detritus became so common that later travelers gave it a grimly practical name, prairie coal, as these abandoned heirlooms were often broken up and used as firewood on the treeless plains. This shared road creates a strange, temporary community. Historians still argue about the true nature of these traveling societies. Were they supportive, tight-knit groups, forged in the crucible of shared hardship, where everyone looked out for one another, or were they just temporary, tense alliances of strangers, rife with suspicion, bickering over grazing rights, and arguments over whose turn it was to stand guard at night. The truth, as you experience it, is somewhere in the middle. You share a campfire and stories with the family in the wagon behind you, a genuine moment of connection. But you also eye the wagon train captain with distrust, wondering if his decisions are wise or reckless. You see acts of incredible kindness and acts of petty selfishness. By evening, you are bone tired. The wagons circle up, a defensive posture that's more about corralling the livestock than fighting off attackers. You unhitch the oxen, start a fire with dried buffalo dung called chips, another glamorous detail they leave out of the movies, and cook your meager meal. The smell of frying bacon mingles with the ever-present sense of dust and unwashed humanity. After dinner, someone might pull out a fiddle or a banjo, and a few weary notes drift through the campsite, a lonely sound in the vast emptiness. You crawl onto your bedroll under the wagon, the hard ground a welcome relief for your aching feet. You stare up at a dome of stars more brilliant than you have ever seen, a cold and different beauty. The wagon above you, your entire world in a box, creaks softly in the wind. You are only a few weeks into a journey that will take months, and as sleep finally claims you, you don't dream of gold or freedom. You dream of a soft bed, a hot bath, and a single day without the constant, jarring motion of the ride. The sun rises on another identical day, and with it comes the first and most pressing thought: water. It's a thought that will dominate your every waking moment on the trail. Back east, water was something you took for granted. It flowed from pumps, filled wells, and ran in predictable rivers. Out here, it is a fickle and often treacherous resource. Your guidebook, a well-intentioned but often inaccurate companion, marks the locations of springs and creeks, but it can't account for the whims of a dry season. Your daily routine becomes a relentless hunt. The wagon train captain sends scouts ahead, their sole purpose to locate the next water source. The mood of the entire camp rises and falls with their reports. Good news: a clear, running stream just 5 miles ahead brings a palpable wave of relief. Bad news: the expected creek is bone dry, and the next known source is 2 days hard travel away drapes a pall of anxiety over everyone. You immediately begin rationing. The water in your barrel, already tasting stale and metallic, is now more precious than gold. You're allowed only a small cup for yourself and a carefully measured portion for your oxen. The animal's thirst is a constant worry. Their survival depends on it, and therefore, so does yours. When you do find water, it's rarely the pristine, bubbling spring of your imagination. More often than not, it's a muddy, brackish pool, churned up by the livestock of the wagon trains that passed before you. You can see the faint shimmer of alkali on the surface, a mineral salt that can make both humans and animals violently ill. This is one of the trail's cruelest tricks, a life-saving substance that can also be a poison. A small, sad bit of trail wisdom you quickly learn is to watch the animal carcasses. If you see the skeletons of several animals clustered around a waterhole, it's a sure sign the water is toxic. Even if the water isn't poisoned, it's almost certainly contaminated. The Oregon Trail was a heavily trafficked corridor. Hundreds of thousands of people and millions of animals used this route, and sanitation was not a priority. The same rivers and streams that provided drinking water were also used for bathing, washing clothes, and as a dumping ground for all manner of waste. Cholera was the great scourge of the trail, an intestinal disease that spread like wildfire through contaminated water sources. Its onset was terrifyingly swift. A person could be perfectly healthy at breakfast and gone by evening. You watch your fellow travelers with a new, fearful eye. A simple case of stomach cramps in a neighboring family is no longer a private matter. It's a potential death sentence for the entire train. Historians still debate the exact mortality rates on the overland trails. Estimates range from 4 to 10%, meaning that on a journey of 2.0 miles, you could expect to see a grave for every 80 yards. And disease, particularly cholera, was the primary killer. Far outstripping conflicts or accidents, you learn to boil all your drinking water. A tedious but life-saving chore that consumes precious time and fuel. You guard your water barrel, keeping the lid tightly secured, not just against dust, but against the invisible threat that haunts every sip. One afternoon, you come across a sight that perfectly captures the desperation of the water quest. It's a series of shallow pits dug into a dry riverbed, a technique called gypsum digging. Travelers would dig down through the sand, hoping to reach the water table below. It was back-breaking work, for a pitiful reward, maybe a few cups of gritty, bitter water. You see the discarded shovels and the exhausted depressions in the sand left by others. You, too, take out your spade and begin to dig, your muscles screaming in protest. The sun beats down, and the only sound is your own ragged breathing and the scraping of metal on sand. This isn't an adventure. This is a primal struggle for survival, reduced to its most basic element. Then the evening, sitting by the fire, you watch the coffee brew. The boiling water seems to cleanse not just the liquid itself, but your anxieties as well. It's a small ritual of control in a world where you have very little. You've developed a new appreciation, a deep, cellular respect for water. You think back to your life in street, Lewis, to the casual way you draw a bucket from the well or complain about the rain. Here, a single, clean drop feels like a miracle. This is a strange and difficult kind of education. A little-known fact about the trail is that some travelers carried rudimentary water filters made of charcoal, sand, and cloth, an early and desperate attempt at biosecurity. You don't have one, so you boil your water, and you pray as you drift off to sleep. The sound you long for is not the fiddle's tune, but the gentle, steady sound of falling rain. Your relationship with food has changed dramatically. Back home, food might have been a source of pleasure, variety, or social gathering. Out here on the trail, it has been stripped down to its most basic function: fuel. And the fuel you're running on is monotonous, greasy, and nutritionally suspect. Your diet revolves around a holy trinity of trail staples: bacon, beans, and bread. The bacon isn't the crisp, rosy pink variety you might imagine. It's salt-cured pork, packed in giant barrels of brine to preserve it. It's incredibly fatty and so salty that it makes your teeth ache. You fry it up for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The grease is never thrown away, it's a precious commodity. You save it in a tin can and use it for everything: to fry your bread, to grease the wagon axles in an emergency, and even, as some trail diaries mention, to condition your leather boots. Its salty, smoky smell clings to your clothes and your hands, a constant reminder of your limited menu. Then there are the beans, dried pinto or navy beans, cooked 4 hours over the campfire in a heavy iron pot until they become a thick, mushy stew. They are hearty and filling, but you eat them so often that you begin to lose track of what day it is. It's just another bean day. The bread is the most challenging. You don't have an oven, so you learn to make Dutch oven bread by placing dough in a cast iron pot, putting the lid on, and burying the whole thing in hot coals. It's a tricky art. More often than not, it comes out either burnt on the outside and raw in the middle, or as a dense, tough loaf that requires serious jaw strength to consume. On days when you're in a hurry, you make flapjacks, simple flour and water pancakes fried in bacon grease. Or, most commonly, you eat hardtack. These are the infamous tooth breakers, the rock-like biscuits that have been a staple for sailors and soldiers for centuries. They are designed for longevity, not for flavor or texture. You learn to soak them in your coffee to make them chewable, a soggy, tasteless mush that nonetheless fills your stomach. You miss fresh food with an intensity that surprises you. You dream of apples, of lettuce, of anything that crunches and isn't coated in salt or grease. This lack of fresh fruit and vegetables isn't just a matter of taste, it's a serious health risk. Scurvy, a disease caused by a lack of vitamin C, was a real and present danger. Its symptoms are unpleasant bleeding gums, loose teeth, and extreme lethargy. You watch your fellow travelers for the telltale signs. Some resourceful women, remembering folk remedies, would gather wild berries or prairie greens like dandelion leaves when they could find them, creating salads that were more medicinal than culinary. This practice of foraging was a vital, uncelebrated skill that saved countless lives. One of the more peculiar food items you encounter is desiccated vegetables. This was a 19th century attempt at freeze-drying. Cabbages, carrots, and turnips were compressed into hard, dry cakes. To eat them, you break off a piece and boil it for hours. The result was a slimy, brownish sludge that bore little resemblance to its original form. Soldiers during the Civil War, who were also fed this stuff, grimly nicknamed it desecrated vegetables. You try it once and decide you'd rather stick with the beans. Historians often study pioneer diaries to understand their daily lives, and these journals are filled with surprisingly detailed descriptions of food. They don't just list what they ate, they obsess over it. They write longingly about meals they had years ago. They document, with great excitement, the rare occasion they managed to hunt a rabbit or catch a fish. These entries reveal a deep-seated psychological need. Food was one of the few things they could exert some control over, and a good meal was a major morale boost. The question of how much food was enough for the journey is something that plagued every immigrant. Academic analysis of supply lists shows a wide variation, suggesting that many families were ill-prepared, either bringing too little and facing starvation, or too much and exhausting their animals. The correct amount remains a point of historical speculation, as it depended so much on luck and the length of the journey. One evening, a man from another wagon approaches your fire. He holds up a small bird he managed to shoot. He offers to trade half of it for a cup of your sugar. Sugar, like coffee, is a precious morale booster, a taste of civilization in the wild. You agree to the trade instantly. That night, you roast the small bird over the fire, and its savory aroma feels like the most luxurious perfume in the world. You and your family share the tiny morsels of meat, savoring each bite. It's not much, but it's different. It's a break from the tyranny of bacon and beans. As you lie down to sleep, the memory of that small, flavorful meal is a comforting warmth against the cold ground. It's a reminder that even in this stripped-down existence, a small change, a tiny bit of variety, can feel like an incredible feast. The land itself is your biggest adversary. It's not malicious, but its sheer scale and indifference are overwhelming. You had seen maps, of course, but they are flat, abstract representations. They do not prepare you for the reality of the Great Plains, an immense, treeless expanse that stretches to every horizon. At first, it's beautiful in its emptiness, but after weeks of seeing nothing but grass and sky, the beauty curdles into a profound sense of agoraphobia. You feel small, exposed, and utterly insignificant. The sky is a vast, oppressive dome. Your little wagon train is just a line of ants crawling across a giant's floor. The weather is not a backdrop, it's an active participant in your struggle. It is a thing of violent, unpredictable extremes. The sun is a relentless hammer. There is no shade. The canvas top of your wagon offers some respite, but it quickly turns the space into a sweltering, airless oven. Your skin, once pale from city life, is now burned a dark, leathery brown. Your lips are constantly cracked and bleeding. You wear your hat low, not for style, but to ward off sunstrike. Then come the thunderstorms. They are unlike anything you have ever experienced in the East. They don't just roll and they explode across the sky. The horizon turns a bruised, greenish black. The wind hits first, a physical wall that threatens to rip the canvas cover from your wagon. Then comes the rain, not in drops but in solid, driving sheets that turn the dusty trail into a sea of thick, clinging mud called gumbo. The wheels sink up to their axles. Then the oxen strain, their hoofs finding no purchase. You and the other men put your shoulders to the wheels, pushing with all your might, caked in mud from head to toe, gaining only inches for your Herculean efforts. Lightning is a terrifying spectacle, with no trees or hills to attract it. Your little wagon rain is the tallest thing for miles. It splits the sky with blinding flashes, followed by thunder that feels like a physical blow to your chest. The animals are frantic with fear. You learn to unhitch the oxen and move them away from the wagons, hoping to avoid a lightning strike on the metal wheel rims or any chains. One of the more peculiar and dangerous prairie phenomena you learn about is ball lightning. While still not fully understood by science today, travelers reported seeing glowing spheres of light drifting across the plains during storms, a ghostly and unnerving sight. The rivers are another constant challenge. There are no bridges. Crossing them is a chaotic and dangerous operation. If the river is low, you might be able to ford it, bumping and splashing across the rocky riverbed. But if it's high and swift, the situation becomes much more serious. You have to cut your wagon box, stuffing rags and tar into the seams to make it watertight. You then empty the wagon of its heaviest contents, ferry them across in small, makeshift rafts, and then swim the wagon itself across, with men on either side struggling to keep it from tipping over in the current. It's an all-day affair, exhausting and perilous. Many lives and countless tons of precious supplies were lost to the rivers of the West. The question of which route to take at a major river crossing or a fork in the trail was a source of constant debate and anxiety within the wagon train. Historians analyzing trail diaries note that these decision points were where wagon reins most often fractured. The Sublette cutoff versus the main trail, for example, was a famous point of contention. The cutoff promised to save a week of travel, but it involved a brutal 50-mile stretch with no water. Was the risk worth the reward? This is a question that scholars, comfortable in their air-conditioned offices, can analyze with detachment. For you, standing there at the fork, covered in dust and tormented by thirst, it's a life-or-death gamble. One day, the wind changes. It carries a strange, dry chill. The old-timers in the trains lift the air and look at the sky with worried eyes. They mutter about a blue norther, a fast-moving cold front. Within an hour, the temperature plummets. A sudden, unseasonable blizzard descends upon the plains. One moment, it's a warm autumn day. The next, you are fighting your way through blinding snow. The world is reduced to a swirling vortex of white. You can't see the wagon in front of you. The wind howls with a mournful, human-like sound. You struggle to keep the oxen moving, their breath frosting in the frigid air. You huddle together for warmth that night, the thin canvas of the wagon offering little protection against the biting cold. The snow piles up around you, a beautiful, deadly blanket. The next morning, the sun is out, glittering on a pristine world of white. The storm is gone as quickly as it came, but the landscape has been transformed into a treacherous trap of snowdrifts and ice. As you stand there, shivering in the brilliant, cold light, you understand. The land doesn't care if you live or die. It is not your friend or your enemy. It simply is, and you're just a tiny, fragile speck trying to crawl across its vast, indifferent face. After months that feel like years, you finally see it on the horizon. Not a city, not even a town by Eastern standards, but a small, raw collection of buildings huddled together on a vast, empty plain. This is it, your destination. A place called Dusty Gulch, or Lonely Creek, or some other equally uninspiring name. A frontier town. The relief you feel is so profound it almost brings you to your knees. You have survived the journey. But as your wagon rundles down the settlement's main, and only, street, that initial wave of relief begins to recede, replaced by a sense of profound disappointment. The town you imagined, perhaps fueled by those promotional pamphlets or whispered stories back east, was one of bustling commerce, neat little houses, and a sense of vibrant community. The reality is, Brown. The street is not paved, it's a wide, rutted track of dirt that turns to thick mud when it rains and choking dust when it's dry. The air, what you daydreamed would be pure and clean, is thick with the smell of horse manure, wood smoke, and the nearby slaughterhouse. The buildings are not charming log cabins or stately brick structures. They are hastily erected, unpainted wooden boxes with flat, false fronts. These iconic boomtown facades, a classic feature of Western movie sets, were a form of cheap, aspirational architecture. They were designed to make a one-story shack look like a grander, two-story establishment, projecting a sense of permanence and prosperity that the town itself had not yet earned. It's all a bit of a sham, and you can see the flimsy bracing behind the grand fronts. You see a few other wagons, their canvas covers tattered, their owners looking just as bewildered as you feel. You see leathery-faced men in dusty clothes leading pack mules. You see a few women in faded calico dresses, hurrying from one building to another with their heads down, as if trying to avoid the mud and the stairs. There are no neat picket fences, no cheerful gardens. Instead, the spaces between buildings are littered with discarded barrels, broken bottles, and the general detritus of a place where people are too busy or too tired to care about appearances. You guide your exhausted oxen towards what looks like a livery stable, the town's equivalent of a parking garage. The man who runs it is taciturn and charges you a fee that seems exorbitant, just to unhitch your animals and give them some water and hay. Every transaction here feels sharp-edged and mercenary. You decide to walk the length of the main street, which takes all of 5 minutes. You pass a blacksmith shop, the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil a familiar, comforting sound. You pass a building with a simple sign that says ASSAYER, a reminder that this town likely owes its existence to the hope of finding gold or silver in the nearby hills. You pass two competing saloons, their swinging doors offering glimpses into smoky, dimly lit interiors. And you pass the general store, which seems to be the town's commercial and social hub. A strange and little-known feature of many of these raw frontier towns was the complete lack of public spaces. There were no parks, no town squares, no libraries. Social life happened in commercial venues, the saloon, the general store, or the church if the town was lucky enough to have one. This lack of communal space is a detail that historians of urban planning find fascinating. It created a society where interaction was often transcational, reinforcing the individualistic and sometimes isolating nature of frontier life. You stand at the end of the street, looking back at the ramshackle collection of buildings. This is what you crossed a continent for. This is the promised land. It feels less like an Eden and more like a chaotic, muddy construction site. The question of what made some of these fledgling towns thrive while others vanished is a topic of intense academic study. Was it location, access to a railroad, the discovery of a mineral vein, or was it the sheer grit and social cohesion of its first inhabitants? Historians call the ones that failed ghost towns. But at this early stage, every town is a potential ghost town, balanced precariously on the edge of failure. A man stumbles out of one of the saloons, squints at you and your travel-worn appearance, and spits a stream of tobacco juice into the dust near your feet. He doesn't say a word, just turns and ambles away. It's not a hostile gesture, just an indifferent one. You are the new arrival. Another piece of driftwood washed up on this dusty shore. No one is here to welcome you. There is no welcoming committee. Your journey across the plains is over, but as you stare at the crude, uninviting town, you realize a new, and perhaps more difficult, journey is just beginning, the journey of making a life here. Your first priority is to restock. The months on the trail have depleted your supplies to almost nothing. You have a few pounds of flour left, a scraping of salt pork in the bottom of the barrel, and a desperate craving for anything that isn't hardtack. You walk towards the largest building on the street, which has a faded sign that reads GNERALME or CHJISEJ. The Abernathy. Truth. This is the beating heart of the town. A combination of grocery store, hardware store, post office, and pharmacy. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, you step into a dimly lit space. Your eyes take a moment to adjust from the harsh glare outside. The air inside is thick with 100 competing smells: coffee beans, leather, kerosene, tobacco, and the dry, dusty scent of bolts of fabric. The shelves are crammed from floor to ceiling with a chaotic jumble of goods. You see sacks of flour and sugar, barrels of pickles and crackers, tins of canned peaches a luxury, and slabs of bacon hanging from hooks. On other shelves are pickaxes, shovels, coils of rope, ammunition, cast iron skillets, and horse tack. It's a testament to the fact that out here, the store couldn't afford to specialize. It had to be everything to everyone. A man with a magnificent mustache and a slightly stained apron stands behind a long wooden counter. He watches you with an unreadable expression. This is J. B. Abernathy, the proprietor. A.G.S., one of the most powerful men in town. He controls the flow of goods, and by extension, he controls the prices. You pull out your carefully prepared shopping list. Flour, sugar, coffee, salt, bacon, maybe some beans. The basics. You ask for the price of flour, and the number he quotes makes your jaw drop. It's 3, maybe 4 times what you would have paid back in street. Lewis, you try to haggle, but he just shrugs. Supply and demand, he says, without a hint of apology. Takes a long time to get things out here. That's right. Every sack of flour, every barrel of nails had to be hauled by wagon or, if the town was lucky, by the new railroad. Across hundreds of miles, the freight costs were immense, and he is passing them directly on to you with a healthy profit margin on top. This is the harsh economic reality of the frontier. While land might have been cheap or even free under the Homestead Act, the cost of living was astronomical. Historians who study economic ledgers from this period confirm this frontier price gouge. A simple shovel could cost a week's wages for a common laborer. This economic pressure is a part of the story often ignored in favor of heroic tales of cowboys and gunfighters. But for the average person, the daily struggle was not against outlaws, but against the crushing cost of survival. You look around the store, your budget shrinking with every item you consider. You see a small crate of dusty-looking apples. They are wrinkled and bruised, but they are fresh fruit. You ask the price. He names a figure, so high you almost laugh. It's a choice between a dozen apples or a new axe handle. The axe handle wins. The dream of that crisp, juicy bite will have to wait. One of the more peculiar items for sale, tucked away on a high shelf, is a box of something called portable soup. This was a bizarre, early form of Llewellyn cube, made by boiling down a meat broth until it became a hard, glue-like substance. It was supposedly a lightweight, nutrient-dense food for travelers. Reports on its taste vary from tolerable to vile. You decide to pass on the meat glue. You also notice that Abernathy is conducting transactions using several different forms of currency. A miner pays for his tobacco with a small pinch of gold dust, which Abernathy weighs carefully on a tiny brass scale. A rancher pays with a signed note, a promise to settle his debt after the next cattle drive. Cash, in the form of official U.S. government greenbacks, is surprisingly scarce. This complex, multi-layered economy, often based on credit, barter, and raw materials, is a subject that economic historians find fascinating. It was a system built on trust, reputation, and, in Abernathy's case, a very detailed ledger book. The question of whether these store owners were essential community builders providing credit and goods, or exploitative monopolists, is still debated. For you, standing on the other side of the counter, the answer feels pretty clear. You end up leaving the store with far less than you'd hoped for, and your small purse of money is significantly lighter. You've got the bare essentials to last you a few weeks, but that's it. As you step back out into the dusty street, the town feels even harsher than before. The glorious freedom of the West is turning out to have a very high price tag. You look at the sacks in your arms, flour and beans. It seems that even though your journey is over, your diet isn't going to change anytime soon. The crushing realization dawns on you. You didn't just have to survive the trip to get here. No, you have to survive being here. With a few provisions secured, your next instinct is to find a place to wash away the trail dust and maybe hear a friendly voice. The most obvious, and frankly only, social hubs in town are the two saloons. You pick the one that looks slightly less likely to collapse, push open its swinging doors, and step inside. The first thing that hits you is the smell of potent cocktail of stale beer, cheap whiskey, sweat, and thick tobacco smoke that stings your eyes. The room is dark and grimy, the low ceiling stained brown from the smoke. A long, scarred wooden bar runs along one wall, behind which a portly bartender with weary eyes is wiping a glass with a dirty rag. The floor is covered in sawdust, which you quickly realize is there for a very practical reason to soak up spilled drinks and spit from the ubiquitous as chewing tobacco users. You see several brass spittoons, or gaboons, scattered around, though the brown stains on the floor suggest that aim is not always a priority. This is the Frontier Saloon, the quintessential institution of the Wild West, but it's a far cry from the movie version. There's no lively piano player hammering out a jaunty tune. There's no glamorous singer in a sequin dress. The piano in the corner is silent, and a couple of its keys are missing. The only music is the low murmur of conversation and the clinking of glasses. A few men are scattered around the room. Two grizzled prospectors with long, unkempt beards are hunched over a table, speaking in low tones. The cowboy, recognizable by his dusty clothes and worn boots, leans against the bar, staring silently into his glass. A couple of freighters, their work done for the day, are playing a listless game of cards. The atmosphere isn't one of rollicking fun, but of tired, quiet desperation. This is where men came after a long day of back-breaking labor to drink away their aches, their loneliness, and their disappointment. You walk up to the bar. Whiskey, you say. The bartender sloshes a measure of amber liquid into a thick, cloudy glass. You take a sip, and the raw, fiery liquor burns a trail all the way down to your stomach. It's not aged, smooth bourbon. It's cheap, potent, and probably made in a back room somewhere. Its primary quality is its strength. You learn that the saloon served many functions. It was a de facto business office, where deals were struck and contracts were signed over a handshake and a drink. It was an employment agency, where a rancher might come looking to hire extra hands. It was a post office before an official one was established, with mail for locals pinned to a board on the wall. And, of course, it was a place for entertainment, but the entertainment was usually self-made gambling. Poker and faro were the most popular games. You see the faro layout painted on one of the tables, a simple, fast-paced game that was notorious for separating fools from their money. A common misconception is that these saloons were lawless dens of constant violence. While fights certainly happened, a full-blown, guns-blazing shootout was exceptionally rare. It was bad for business. The saloon owner, or publican, had a vested interest in keeping things relatively peaceful. A broken mirror or a shattered window was an expensive replacement. A fascinating and little-known fact is that many saloons in civilized towns had a rule you had to check your firearm at the door. The image of every cowboy walking into a saloon armed to the teeth is largely a Hollywood invention. Historians often debate the social role of the saloon. Were they dens of vice that drained men of their wages and fueled alcoholism, or were they essential third places? Vital social centers that provided companionship and a sense of community for a transient and lonely population of men? The answer is likely both. You see a man at the end of the bar who has clearly had too much. his head slumped on the counter. The bartender ignores him, but you also see the two prospectors sharing a laugh, a brief moment of connection in a hard world. As you stand there, nursing your drink, you notice the art on the walls. It's mostly calendars from beer companies featuring rosy-cheeked women, and a few faded, lurid posters from traveling shows. In a place utterly devoid of female company, the gender ratio in many of these towns was drastically skewed. These simple pictures served as a sad reminder of a softer world left far behind. You finish your whiskey, the warmth spreading through your limbs. The saloon hasn't offered the cheerful welcome you might have hoped for, but it has offered a moment of stillness, a place to simply be. You've learned something important about this new life. Community here isn't something that's given to you. It's something you have to seek out. In dusty, imperfect places like this, you nod to the bartender, leave a coin on the bar, and push back out through the swinging doors into the harsh afternoon light. The dust and the manure smell a little less offensive now. You feel a tiny bit less like a stranger, and a little bit more like just another tired man in a tired town. Feeling a bit more grounded after your visit to the saloon, you start to wonder about the law in this place. The town, with its rough edges and transient population, feels like it's perpetually on the verge of chaos. You look for a sign of authority, a symbol of order. Eventually, you spotted a small, unassuming wooden building with a single word painted above the door, JIL. A small, hand-carved sign next to it adds, Sheriff. You half expect a legendary figure to be standing out front, a tall, steely-eyed lawman with a silver star gleaming on his chest, a hero ready to face down evil at high noon. The reality, as is becoming a theme in your new life, is far more mundane. The man who eventually emerges from the office is of average height, with a drooping mustache and a weary look in his eyes that matches the bartender's. He wears a dusty vest, and the star pin to it is made of tin, not silver. It's slightly bent. He looks less like a mythic hero and more like a man who's had a long day. He is the town sheriff, a figure that has been wildly romanticized by fiction. In truth, the job of a frontier lawman was often thankless, poorly paid, and incredibly dangerous. He wasn't just a gunfighter, he was the town's jack-of-all-trades civil servant. His duties included everything from stopping the occasional drunken brawl to serving legal papers, collecting taxes, and even sweeping out the jail. His jurisdiction was often vast, covering hundreds of square miles of empty territory, a responsibility that was impossible to manage effectively. You watch as a local merchant comes up to the sheriff, complaining loudly that some freighters' mules have gotten loosened or eating the vegetables outside his store. The sheriff sighs, pushes his hat back on his head, and trudges off to deal with the problem. This is the reality of Frontier, just as less about dramatic shootouts and more about dealing with stray livestock. The whole concept of law and order in the West was inconsistent and devolved over time. In the very early stages of a settlement, there was often no formal law at all. Justice, such as it was, might be meted out by informal miners, courts, or, in the worst cases, by vigilante committees. These groups are a controversial subject for historians. Were they grassroots movements of concerned citizens trying to establish order where none existed, or were they little more than lynch mobs, settling personal scores under the guise of justice? The historical record is full of examples of both. As towns grew, they would hire a marshal or elect a sheriff, but these men were often political appointees, not necessarily the most qualified candidates. Their pay was low, so they often had to keep a second job, like running a saloon or a gambling hall, which could create obvious conflicts of interest. The idea of a dedicated, professional police force was a luxury of the established eastern cities. One of the more peculiar and little-known aspects of frontier law enforcement was the posse comitatus. This was a legal right that allowed a lawman to conscript any able-bodied man to help him chase down a suspect. That means you, A newcomer just trying to mind your own business could be legally required to grab a gun and join a posse to hunt down an outlaw. Refusing could land you in that very jail. It was a system born of necessity, a way to bolster a one-man police force, but it put ordinary people in incredibly dangerous situations. You peek through the grimy window of the jail. It's a single room, dark and bare, with 2 small cells at the back. It looks less like a place of punishment and more like a place to hold someone until the circuit judge came to town, which might only happen a few times a year. The entire legal system was slow and stretched thin. A man could wait in a cell for months just to have his case heard. Later in the day, you see the sheriff again. He's trying to break up an argument between 2 drunken cowboys in front of a saloon. It's not a tense standoff, it's a clumsy, pathetic scuffle. The sheriff doesn't draw his gun. He wades in, speaks to them in a low, firm voice, and eventually manages to separate them, sending each on his way with a warning. He looks exhausted by the effort. You realize that the peace of this town isn't maintained by the quick draw of a gun. It's maintained by a fragile, unspoken agreement among the townspeople to mostly get along, because the alternative is chaos. The sheriff is not the enforcer of this peace, but its symbol. His real power comes not from his gun, but from the consent of the governed, however grudgingly given. He is a buffer, a mediator, a tired man doing a difficult job. As you head back to your wagon to prepare for a night in this strange new place, you feel a small, grudging respect for the man with the bent tin star. He is not the hero you expected, but perhaps he is the hero this town actually needs. Your image of the West is inseparable from the image of the gun. The Colt's revolver, the Winchester rifle, they are icons, symbols of self-reliance and the taming of a wild land. You see them everywhere in this new town. Men have revolvers holstered on their hips, and rifles are propped in the corners of every establishment. It seems that owning a firearm is as common as owning a pair of boots. This, you assume, must lead to a culture of constant, hair-trigger violence, just like in the dime novels. You quickly learn, however, that the reality of gun culture is far more awkward and less dramatic than the legends suggest. Yes, many people are armed, but the reasons are more practical than romantic. A rifle is a tool. It's for hunting deer or antelope to supplement your meager diet. It's for protection against predators, both the 4-legged and, occasionally, the 2-legged kind. A revolver is a personal defense weapon in a place where the nearest sheriff might be a day's ride away. But carrying one is also a bit of a fashion statement, a way of declaring that you are not a tenderfoot, that you belong here. The iconic fast-draw duel at high noon in the middle of the street, it almost never happened. Historians have combed through records and found that this kind of formalized walk-down was almost entirely a creation of fiction. Real gunfights were clumsy, chaotic, and terrifying affairs. They usually happened at close range, often in the dark confines of a saloon, and involved multiple people shooting wildly. Accuracy was abysmal. The idea of a gunman fanning the hammer of his revolver to fire multiple shots quickly was a real technique, but it made the weapon wildly inaccurate. More often than not, the only things hit were the ceiling, the furniture, and innocent bystanders. You begin to notice that while many men carry guns, they are rarely drawn. There's a tacit understanding that to pull a gun is to escalate a situation to a point of no return. Arguments are settled with fists or harsh words far more often than with lead. In fact, one of the most common firearm-related injuries wasn't from duels, but from simple accidents. These early firearms lacked modern safety features. A man climbing down from a wagon could easily snag the hammer of his revolver, causing it to discharge into his own leg. Dropping a rifle could cause it to fire. These mundane, embarrassing accidents were a far more frequent cause of gunshot wounds than heroic shootouts. A strange and little-known truth about the gun-toting West is that many of the most famous scout towns like Dodge City and Tombstone passed strict gun control ordinances. Upon entering the town limits, you were often required to check your firearms with the sheriff or at a designated business. Signs were posted that read the carrying of firearms strictly prohibited. The very towns that are now famous for their gunfights were actively trying to disarm the cowboys and drovers who poured into town looking for trouble. The famous gunfight at the O.K. Corral was, at its core, a conflict over this very issue. The ERPS were trying to enforce the town's ordinance against the Clanton S and McClory's carrying guns inside the city. The debate among historians over the prevalence of violence in the West is ongoing. Some argue that, on a per capita basis, these frontier towns were actually less violent than major eastern cities of the same era. They contend that the myth of the violent West was exaggerated by newspapers and dime novelists, who found that sensational stories sold well. Others argue that while the rate of violence might have been lower, its nature was different, more personal, more sudden, and with fewer legal repercussions. The truth is likely a muddled combination of both perspectives. One afternoon, you're in the general store when a young cowboy, barely more than a boy, comes in to show off his brand new, nickel-plated Colt Peacemaker. He pulls it from its holster to demonstrate its smooth action to the store owner. As he does, his finger slips, and the gun goes off with a deafening roar inside the small, enclosed space. The bullet trips through a sack of flour, sending a white cloud billowing into the air, before embedding itself in a side of bacon hanging from the ceiling. For a moment, there is dead silence. Everyone freezes. The young cowboy's face is a mask of pure horror and embarrassment. The store owner, covered in a fine dusting of flour, just stares at the swinging side of bacon. Then, slowly, he starts to curse, a long, low, and incredibly detailed monologue about the boy's intelligence, his ancestry, and the cost of a ruined sack of flour. No one laughs. No one is impressed by the power of the new gun. It's just a stupid, dangerous accident. As you help sweep up the mess, you realize that the gun, in reality, is not a symbol of power or heroism. It's a heavy, dangerous piece of metal that can cause a lot of trouble in the wrong hands. And in this town, it seems like there are an awful lot of wrong hands. After a few days in town, you become acutely aware of a pervasive, inescapable fact: the lack of hygiene. In your old life, you might have complained about city grime, but this is something else entirely. It's a deep, foundational layer of filth that permeates every aspect of existence. The ever-present dust and manure are just the beginning. Personal cleanliness is a luxury few can afford or have time for. Water is often scarce and has to be hauled by hand from a communal well or a nearby creek. Heating that water for a bath requires a great deal of firewood, another precious commodity. The result is that a full body bath is a weekly, or even monthly, event, not a daily ritual. You learn to make do with a small basin of cold water and a rag for a quick spit bath in the morning. Everyone smells of sweat, dust, and wood smoke. You get used to it, which is perhaps the most alarming part. Laundry is an even more arduous task. It's an all-day affair, usually undertaken by the women of the town. They haul water, heat it over an open fire, scrub clothes on a washboard with harsh lye soap, rinse them, and hang them to dry on whatever bushes or fences are available, where they are promptly coated with a fresh layer of dust. You begin to understand why most clothing is made of durable, dark-colored fabrics like woolen denim. They don't show the dirt as easily. Then there is the issue of facilities. There are no sewer systems, no indoor plumbing. Behind most buildings, you'll find a small, rickety wooden structure, the outhouse. It's a simple pit dug in the ground with a shed built over it. The smell is potent, especially in the summer heat. When the pit is full, the solution is not to empty it, but to simply move the shed over a newly dug pit. This practice meant that the ground around any long-standing settlement was riddled with old, forgotten waste pits, a ticking time bomb of potential groundwater contamination. Medical care, should you need it, is a terrifying prospect. The man who calls himself doctor in this town might have some formal training, but he could just as easily be a former barber, a failed prospector, or just a man with a steady hand and a strong stomach. There was no regulation, no licensing board. Anyone could hang out a shingle and claim to be a physician. His office is likely a small room in the back of the pharmacy, and his tools consist of a saw for amputations, a few forceps, and a bottle of whiskey for anesthesia. A truly bizarre and little-known intersection of professions was that of the barber surgeon. This tradition dated back to medieval Europe. Because barbers had sharp razors and were skilled at cutting, they were often entrusted with minor surgical procedures like bloodletting, tooth extraction, and lancing boils. The iconic red and white striped barber pole is actually a relic of this practice, symbolizing bloody bandages. While the profession was becoming more specialized back east, on the frontier, your barber might still be your best bet for a toothache. The understanding of germ theory is still in its infancy and has certainly not reached this dusty corner of the world. A doctor might move from treating a patient with a festering wound to delivering a baby without so much as washing his hands. Amputation was a common solution for a badly broken limb or a serious infection, as doctors knew that infection, which they called gangrene or blood poisoning, was a death sentence. The survival rates for these crude surgeries were shockingly low. Historians are still trying to piece together a clear picture of public health on the frontier. The romantic narrative focuses on gunshot wounds, but the reality is that people are more likely to die from dysentery, typhoid, influenza, or complications from childbirth. The lack of sanitation, poor nutrition, and absence of effective medical care created a perfect storm for disease. The question of how these communities survived at all is a testament to the resilience of the human immune system and a good deal of luck. One evening, a man in the saloon complains of a terrible toothache. After another shot of whiskey fails to numb the pain, the bartender suggests a visit to the blacksmith. You watch, morbidly fascinated, as the blacksmith, a burly man whose hands are permanently stained with soot, uses a pair of his own pliers to wrench the offending tooth from the man's jaw. The man screams, spits blood into the sawdust, and is then handed the bottle of whiskey as payment on the septic. You instinctively touch your own jaw, a silent prayer that your teeth remain healthy. You think of the pamphlet that promised air, so pure it can cure the consumption. It said nothing about the water that could kill you, the food that could sicken you, or the doctor who could finish you off. The Wild West, you conclude, is not a place for the sick or the weak. Survival here requires a constitution as strong and as rugged as the land itself. The meager funds you arrived with are dwindling at an alarming rate. The initial restocking at the general store and the fees for your oxen have taken a significant chunk. The reality of your situation settles in with the cold weight of a winter stone. You need a job. The romantic notion of striking it rich or living freely off the land has evaporated, replaced by the mundane, universal need for a steady income. So, you start looking. But what jobs are actually available in a town like this? The heroic professions from the dime novels are nowhere to be found. There are no postings for professional gunfighter or lone wolf adventurer. The help wanted signs, if they exist at all, are for hard, physical labor. You could try the livery stable. The work involves mucking out stalls, hauling hay, and tending to the horses and mules of travelers. It's smelly, back-breaking work from sunup to sundown, and the pay is pitiful, barely enough to cover your food and a spot to sleep in the hayloft. Or perhaps you could work for the freighting company. This means loading and unloading heavy wagons, hauling crates and barrels until your muscles scream. It's the 19th century equivalent of working in a warehouse. You watch the freighters for an hour. Their faces are grim, their movements wary. It's a job that will wear 'em and down to a nub in a few short years. If you have a specific trade from back east, like blacksmithing or carpentry, you might be in luck. Skilled labor is in high demand, but the town already has a blacksmith, and starting a competing business would require capital for tools and a workshop, which you don't have. One of the most common, yet often overlooked, jobs was that of a woodhawk. In a land largely devoid of trees, firewood was a crucial and surprisingly valuable commodity. Woodhawks would travel miles, sometimes for days, to find patches of timber along riverbeds. They would cut and haul the wood back to town to sell. It was a lonely, arduous, and sometimes dangerous job, as it often took them into contested territories. You see a man selling a small cart of gnarled cottonwood branches for a price that seems outrageous, and you briefly consider the life of a woodhawk before the thought of that much chopping dissuades you. The question of labor in the West is a complex topic that historians continue to explore. The narrative of the rugged individualist is powerful, but the reality was that most people were wage laborers, working for someone else. The construction of the railroads, the operation of large-scale mines, and the vast cattle ranches all depended on a huge pool of low-wage workers. Was the West truly a land of opportunity for the common man, or did it simply replicate the class structures and labor exploitation of the industrialized East? The evidence suggests the latter was often the case. Then, there's the railroad. The town is buzzing with talk that the tracks are heading this way. The railroad company is hiring. The work is building the grade, laying ties, and hammering spikes. It's relentless, repetitive, and performed under the brutal sun. The pay is slightly better than other manual labor, but the work is seasonal and physically destroying. You see a crew working a few miles outside of town, a line of men moving like a single, exhausted machine, and you decide against it. A particularly strange and little-known job opportunity in some western towns was that of a professional hunter, not a noble sportsman, but a man hired by the railroad or the army to supply meat. This often meant hunting buffalo. These hunters, like the famous Buffalo Bill Cody in his early days, would kill dozens of animals a day, taking only the hides and the choicest cuts of meat, leaving the rest to rot. It was a brutally efficient and ecologically catastrophic enterprise, but for a man with a good rifle and no qualms, it was a way to make a quick and substantial income. Frustrated and disheartened, you end up back at the saloon, not for a drink, but because it's a center of information. You overhear a rancher complaining that HE's short-handed for the upcoming roundup. He needs another hand. HE's not looking for a heroic cowboy, just a body, someone to ride, rope, and push cattle. You've never ridden a horse for more than an hour, and you've certainly never roped anything more challenging than a water bucket, but you're desperate. You approach the rancher. "I can ride." You lie, your voice cracking slightly. He looks you up and down, his eyes lingering on your soft hands and your city-worn boots. He can tell you're a greenhorn, but HE's as desperate as you are. Be at the Lazy K Ranch at sunrise. He grunts, "Don't be late, and don't expect to get rich." You walk out of the saloon with a job. You're going to be a cowboy. The name sounds exciting, adventurous, but from the look on the rancher's face and the ache you already feel in your back, you have a sinking suspicion that the reality of the job will be just another form of hard, thankless labor, only this time you'll be doing it on the back of a horse. The word cowboy conjures a powerful image alone. Stoic figure riding a magnificent horse across a sunset-drenched landscape, a master of his domain, free and independent. This image, you are about to learn, is almost entirely false. The reality of being a cowboy in the 1870s is much closer to being a migrant farm worker on horseback. You arrive at the Lazy K Ranch before dawn, as instructed. It's not a picturesque, quite fenced estate. It's a collection of low, rough-hewn buildings, a sprawling corral, and the pervasive smell of cattle. The rancher points you towards the remuda, the herd of spare horses, and tells you to pick 'em out. The horses are not the sleek, noble steeds of legend. They're small, wary, and mean-looking Mustangs, bred for endurance, not for comfort or temperament. A seasoned cowboy helps you saddle one, his every efficient movement a silent critique of your fumbling efforts. The job, at its core, is simple. You are a cattle herder. For the next several months, your life will revolve around cows. You ride out each day to watch over the vast, scattered herds of longhorn cattle that graze on the open range. Your job is to keep them from straying too far, protect them from predators like coyotes and rustlers, and drive them back towards the ranch for branding or the big cattle drive. The work is incredibly boring. For hours on end, you sit in the saddle under the blazing sun, your world reduced to the sight of grazing cattle and the endless horizon. The silence is broken only by the wind, the buzz of insects, and the lowing of the herd. This crushing monotony is the great unspoken secret of the cowboy's life. Then, moments of sheer terror punctuate the boredom. A sudden thunderstorm can send the notoriously skittish longhorns into a blind panic. A stampede. A stampede is not a thrilling action sequence, it's a terrifying, chaotic avalanche of hooves and horns. Your job is to ride headlong into the storm, trying to turn the herd and get them running in a circle until they exhaust themselves. You ride in the dark, rain lashing your face, with the ground shaking and the thunderous roar of 1,000 panicked animals filling the air. One misstep, one fall from your horse, and you would be trampled into the mud in seconds. The great cattle drives, the most celebrated aspect of cowboy life, or the pinnacle of this hardship, driving thousands of cattle from Texas up to the railheads in Kansas, was a grueling 2 to 3 month journey. You live in the saddle for 18 hours a day. You sleep on the hard ground in a bedroll, regardless of the weather. You eat the same monotonous food day after day, cooked out of a chekogan, which is essentially your old prairie schooner repurposed as a mobile kitchen. The trail cook, or kusai, is one of the most important figures on the drive, and his mood can determine the morale of the entire outfit. A little-known fact about cowboy life is its surprising diversity. The classic image is of a white, Anglo-Saxon hero, but historians estimate that as many as 1 in 4 cowboys was African-American, often former slaves who possessed incredible skills with horses and cattle. Many others were Mexican vaqueros, from whom the American cowboys inherited almost all their tools and techniques. The lariat from Laredo, the chaps from Chaparral eras, the broad-brimmed hat, and even the Western saddle itself. The history of the cowboy is far more multicultural than the myths allow. The debate over the cowboy's true nature, was he a rugged individualist or just an exploited laborer, is a central theme in Western history. You are paid about $1 a day. Low wages for such dangerous work. You own your saddle, but not the horse you ride. You follow the orders of the trail boss without question. At the end of the drive, you're paid off and often left broke in a cow town like Dodge City, where gamblers and saloon keepers are waiting to take your money. In many ways, you are just a cog in a large, mobile factory, the beef bonanza, that supplied the eastern markets. One afternoon, you're tasked with line riding, patrolling a section of the ranch's vast, unfenced territory to check on a distant herd. You ride for hours without seeing another human being. The loneliness is a physical presence. You talk to your horse just to hear the sound of a voice. The sun beats down, the landscape is unchanging, and you feel like the last man on earth. You finally find the herd, a brown mass grazing peacefully in a shallow basin. As you watch them, a calf lets out a distressed cry. You see that it has gotten stuck in a muddy bog near a small creek. Without hesitation, you dismount, take your rope, and wade into the thick, foul-smelling mud. You manage to rope the calf, and, with your horse pulling and you pushing, you wrestle the terrified, mud-caked animal back onto solid ground. You stand there, covered in mud and filth, your muscles aching. The calf wobbles over to its mother. It's not a heroic moment. No one is there to see it. There will be no songs sung about it. But as you get back on your horse, you feel a small, hard kernel of satisfaction. You did the job. You saved a piece of the rancher's property. This, you realize, is the truth of being a cowboy. It's not about freedom and glory. It's about dirty, difficult, and lonely work. And you'll get up and do it all again tomorrow. While you're out on the range, earning your dollar a day through sheer grit and boredom, the town is abuzz with a different kind of dream. A prospector, a grizzled man with a wild look in his eyes, has stumbled into town from the nearby hills, clutching a leather pouch. In the assayer's office, he pours out its contents a small, heavy pile of dull yellow flakes. Gold. The news spreads through the town like a fever. Gold. The word itself is magical. It promises instant wealth, an end to hardship, a ticket out of this dusty life. The rancher you work for grumbles about losing half his hands as men abandon their steady, low-paying jobs for the lure of the mines. The mood in the saloon shifts from weary resignation to manic excitement. You see men poring over crude maps, buying rusty pickaxes and pans from the general store at inflated prices. The dream of the West, which had soured in your mouth, is suddenly revitalized, gleaming and golden. You, too, feel the pull. The thought of spending the rest of your life herding cattle is a grim one. Maybe this is your real chance. You quit your cowboy job, cash in your meager wages, and buy the basic tools of a prospector: a pick, a shovel, and a flat, shallow pan. You join the exodus of hopefuls heading into the hills. The landscape that was once a lonely backdrop for herding cattle now looks different. Every rock, every stream bed, holds a potential fortune. You find a spot along a small creek that hasn't already been claimed by dozens of other men, and you begin the work of placer mining, the most basic form of gold hunting. It is, you discover, soul-crushingly tedious work. You shovel gravel and dirt from the creek bed into your pan. You squat by the water's edge, swishing the pan in a careful, circular motion. The lighter sand and gravel wash over the side, while the heavier materials, hopefully including gold, settle at the bottom. You do this for hours. Your back aches from crouching. Your hands are raw from the cold water and the gritty sand. Your eyes strain to see a telltale glint in the bottom of the pan. After a full day of this back-breaking labor, you have found nothing. The next day, the same, and the next. The initial excitement quickly drains away, replaced by a grim, monotonous determination. You are not so much a treasure hunter as a ditch digger. The 49ers of the California Gold Rush became legends, but the reality for the vast majority of prospectors was failure. The image of a lucky miner pulling a huge nugget from a river is mostly a myth. Most of the easily accessible placer gold was found very early on in any rush. What remained was fine gold dust, flour gold, that required immense labor to collect even a tiny amount. A little-known fact is that many prospectors in the 1872 were actually ray-working claims that had been abandoned by the first wave of miners years before, hoping to find what those earlier, less patient men had missed. The question of whether gold rushes were genuine engines of prosperity or elaborate, tragic lotteries is one that economic historians love to debate. While they certainly populated the West and created boomtowns overnight, the wealth they generated was incredibly concentrated. The real money wasn't made by the men with the pans. It was made by people like J. B. Abernathy, the store owner, who sold them overpriced supplies. It was made by the saloon keepers who took their dust in exchange for whiskey. And eventually, it was made by the large corporations that moved in with heavy machinery for hard rock mining, crushing tons of quartz to extract tiny veins of gold, a process far beyond the means of an individual prospector. One afternoon, after a week of finding nothing but gravel, you see it. At the bottom of your pan, after you've washed everything else away, is a tiny, gleaming flake. It's no bigger than the head of a pin, but it's unmistakably gold. Your heart leaps. You hold it in the palm of your hand, a minuscule speck of pure wealth. It's real. The tiny flake renews your hope. It keeps you going for another week. You find a few more flakes, enough to trade at the general store for some flour and bacon. You are not getting rich. You are barely subsisting. You are working harder than you ever have in your life for a wage that is even lower than what you made as a cowboy. You see the other men around you. Their faces etched with the same combination of hope and despair. Some have given up and are already heading back to town. Their dreams shattered. Others, like you, cling to the possibility that the next Chevrolet FUL will be the one. You are living the prospector's paradox. The dream of immense wealth is keeping you trapped in a cycle of grinding poverty. As you stand in the cold creek, your back screaming in protest, swirling another pan of worthless gravel, you look at the hills around you. They no longer seem full of promise. They seem silent, ancient, and mocking, hoarding their secrets, and offering up just enough of a taste to keep a fool like you digging. Defeated by the creek and your failed attempt at prospecting, you trudge back to town, your pakosk feeling much heavier than it did on the way out. The gold fever has broken, at least for you, and what remains is the familiar, dull ache of reality. But as you approach the settlement, you hear a new sound, a rhythmic, industrial clang that carries for miles on the clear prairie air, the sound of steel on steel. The railroad is coming. This isn't just a new development, it's a revolution. The town, which has so far been a remote island in a sea of grass, is about to be connected to the rest of the nation. The Iron Horse, as the newspapers call it, is the single most powerful agent of change the West has ever seen. You see the construction site first. It's a vast, sprawling scar on the landscape. A small army of men is at work, a diverse and motley crew. You see Irish immigrants, veterans of the Civil War, freed African Americans, and a large contingent of Chinese laborers, all working under the harsh sun. They are building the grade, a flat, raised bed of earth upon which the tracks will lie. They move with a practiced, relentless rhythm. Shoveler rest digging, men with wheelbarrows moving earth, a constant, sweating line of manual labor. Further down the line, another crew is laying the wooden ties, followed by the ironmen who drop the heavy steel rails into place. Then come the spikers, working in teams, their hammers rising and falling in a synchronized cadence that you can hear from a mile away. It's a brutal, factory-like process, but its efficiency is breathtaking. They are laying miles of track a day, devouring the prairie in their path. The arrival of the railroad promises to change everything. For merchants like Abernathy, it means a faster, cheaper, and more reliable supply of goods. Prices for things like flour and sugar will eventually drop, but his volume of business will explode. For ranchers, it means they no longer have to undertake the long, perilous cattle drives to Kansas. They can ship their cattle to the Chicago stockyards directly from a local railhead, a far more efficient and profitable enterprise. The railroad is the harbinger of a new, more organized, and more commercial West. However, this progress comes at a tremendous cost. The construction of the transcontinental railroads is a story rife with political corruption and financial speculation. The government, desperate to unite the country, gave massive land grants and financial subsidies to the railroad companies. This led to the credit mobiler scandal, a complex scheme where railroad insiders overcharged their own companies for construction work, pocketing huge profits and bribing congressmen to look the other way. The question of whether the railroads were a triumph of American ingenuity or a colossal act of corporate welfare is a debate that still animates historians. The consensus is that they were both. You pay close attention to the Chinese laborers. They are a separate, self-contained community within the larger workforce. They perform some of the most difficult and dangerous tasks, including the harrowing work of blasting tunnels through solid rock in the mountains further west. They are paid less than the white workers and are often subjected to intense prejudice. Their contribution to building the West is immense, yet it has been historically minimized. A little-known fact is that the Chinese crews were often preferred by the foremen because they were reliable, didn't drink alcohol, and were meticulously organized. They would drink only boiled water tea, which inadvertently protected them from the waterborne diseases that plagued the other work crews. The railroad also spells doom for others. The independent freighters, the men who drove the long wagon trains of goods, will soon be out of a job. Their slow, laborious method of transport cannot compete with the speed and efficiency of the train. The Native American tribes of the plains see the railroad for what it is: a final, irreversible invasion of their lands. It brings soldiers, settlers, and hunters, and it disrupts the migratory patterns of the buffalo, their primary source of life. The iron horse is a steel artery that will pump the lifeblood of a new nation into the heart of their territory, and in doing so, destroy their way of life. You stand there, watching the smoke-belching locomotive at the end of the line, a monstrous, powerful beast of iron and steam. It seems both miraculous and terrifying. It represents a future of speed, connection, and commerce, but it also represents the end of an era. The slow, quiet, isolated West you have come to know, the West of the wagon train and the lonely cowboy, is about to be tethered to the modern world. The rhythmic hammering of the spikes is a countdown. Each clang is 1 second closer to the death of the old frontier and the birth of something new, something more connected, and perhaps something a little less wild. The arrival of the railroad has a profound and immediate effect on you. The dream of striking it rich with gold has faded, and the life of a cowboy has lost its meager appeal. You want something of your own, a small piece of this vast country to put down roots in. The railroad and the government have just the thing for you: free land. The Homestead Act of 1862 is one of the most significant pieces of legislation in American history. It offers 160 acres of public land to any citizen unwilling to live on it. Improve it by building a home and cultivating the soil for 5 years. To a landless person like you, it sounds like an incredible gift, the fulfillment of the ultimate American promise. You go to the newly established land office in town, file your claim on a patch of prairie a few miles out, and for a small filing fee, you are now a landowner. You are a homesteader. You walk out to your 160 acres. You stand in the middle of your property and turn in a full circle. All you can see is grass. A flat, treeless sea of grass stretching to the horizon in every direction. There are no building materials, no wood, no stone. The crushing reality of the frail and dawns on you. It's free because it is, by all conventional measures, almost impossible to live on. But the early settlers of the plains were nothing if not resourceful. They learned to build their homes not with wood, but with the very ground beneath their feet. You are about to build a soddy, a sod house. You get a special type of plow called a grasshopper plow that is designed to cut the thick, deeply rooted prairie sod into long, brick-like strips. You spend weeks slicing these prairie bricks from your own land, leaving behind bald patches that look like fresh wounds. The work is brutal. Each sod brick weighs 50 pounds or more. You lift and stack them, one by one, to build the walls of your new home, leaving gaps for a door and maybe a single, small window. The roof is made of a lattice of willow branches or scavenged lumber, covered with more sod, grass side up. Your home is literally made of dirt. Inside, it is dark, cramped, and perpetually damp. The earthen walls are surprisingly good insulators, keeping the house relatively cool in the summer and warm in the winter. But when it rains, the roof leaks, not with clean water, but with a slow, muddy ooze that drips onto you, your bed, and your food. Snakes, mice, and insects often burrow through the thick walls and become your unwelcome roommates. One of the more disconcerting and little-known hazards of a soddy was the risk of a cow wandering onto your roof to graze and falling through into your living room. Life on your homestead is defined by an overwhelming sense of isolation. Your nearest neighbor is miles away, a tiny speck on the horizon. You can go for days, even weeks, without seeing another human soul. The wind is a constant companion, a ceaseless, mournful sound that scrapes at the nerves. The silence at night is so profound it feels like a physical weight. This crushing loneliness, what was sometimes called prairie madness, took a heavy toll on the homesteaders, particularly the women, who were often confined to the dark, cramped soddy for long periods. The question of whether the Homestead Act was a success is a point of vigorous debate among historians. On one hand, it settled the West and turned millions of acres of prairie into farmland, creating the nation's breadbasket. On the other hand, the failure rate for homesteaders was astronomical. Some estimates suggest that over half of all homestead claims were eventually abandoned. The 160-acre plot was based on the farming conditions of the much wetter East and was often not large enough to be economically viable in the arid West. Many homesteaders were defeated by drought, grasshopper plagues, blizzards, and the sheer, soul-crushing isolation. Your life becomes a cycle of back-breaking labor. You have to bust the sod, breaking up the tough, virgin prairie soil with a plow and a team of oxen. It's a slow, arduous process. You plant corn or wheat, praying for rain. You dig a well by hand, a deep, dangerous hole in the ground in search of water. You build a fence, not of wood, but of a new invention you bought in town, barbed wire. One evening, after a long day of plowing, you stand outside your sod house. It is not a beautiful home. It's a squat, ugly mound of earth, but it is yours. You look out over the few acres of broken soil that you have managed to carve out of the wilderness. It's not much, but it's a start. The setting sun paints the vast sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. In the distance, you hear the faint, lonely whistle of the train. The sound is no longer just a symbol of change, it's a lifeline. It's a reminder that you are not entirely alone, that you are connected, however tenuously, to the world you left behind. You have your land, you have your soddy, and you have the railroad. Maybe, just maybe, you can make this work. As you struggle to establish your homestead, you become more aware of the women around you in town, on neighboring claims, and in the fabric of this frontier society. Your own experience has been one of public-facing challenges, finding work, navigating the town, breaking the sod. But you begin to see that the women of the West are engaged in a parallel, and in many ways more difficult, struggle. Their story is not one of saloons and gunfights, but of resilience, enterprise, and the quiet, essential work of building a civilization from scratch. The classic image of the Western woman is either the sunbound saint, a long-suffering and pious farm wife, or the saloon girl, a fallen woman with a heart of gold. Both are simplistic stereotypes that obscure a much more complex and fascinating reality. Women on the frontier were homesteaders, ranchers, doctors, entrepreneurs, teachers, and political activists. On your neighboring claim lives a widow who is running her homestead entirely on her own. You see her out in the fields, plowing behind a team of oxen, her face grim with determination. The Homestead Act, in a surprisingly progressive move for its time, allowed single women, widows, and divorcees to claim land in their own right. These girl homesteaders, as they were sometimes called, defied traditional gender roles out of sheer necessity. They built their own sod dyes, dug their own wells, and fought the same battles against drought and loneliness that you do. In town, you notice that many of the respectable businesses are run by women. There's a woman who operates a small bakery out of her home, her fresh bread a welcome and profitable luxury. Another runs a boarding house, providing food and lodging for the many single men in the area. These were socially acceptable forms of female enterprise, extensions of the domestic sphere into the cash economy. But other women pushed further. You hear stories of cattle queens, women who inherited or built up their own ranching empires, commanding the respect of the toughest cowboys. This brings up a question that historians of gender in the West frequently explore. Did the frontier offer women more opportunities and greater equality than the more settled patriarch, at least on one hand? The harsh realities of frontier life often forced a more egalitarian partnership between men and women. Survival depended on shared labor, and the distinct spheres of work were blurred. Women routinely performed tasks that would have been considered men's work back home. On the other hand, they were still bound by the legal and social constraints of the 19th century. They were expected to manage the household, raise children, and perform all the domestic labor in addition to their work on the farm or in the business. Their lives were often ones of a double burden. A fascinating and little-known aspect of the female frontier experience was in the realm of politics, perhaps because they were so central to the building of new communities. Women in the Western Territories gained the right to vote long before their counterparts in the East. The Wyoming Territory granted women suffrage in 1816, a full 50 years before the 19th Amendment. The reasons are still debated by scholars. Was it a genuine belief in equality, a cynical ploy to attract more female settlers to the sparsely populated territory, or a combination of both? Whatever the reason, the West became a laboratory for women's political rights. You also see the darker side of women's lives. Life was hard on everyone, but childbirth was a particularly dangerous ordeal. With little or no access to professional medical care, women relied on midwives and female neighbors. The mortality rate for both mothers and infants was tragically high. You see the small, lonely graves in the town's makeshift cemetery, a silent testament to these private tragedies. One day, your neighbor, the widow, has a crisis. Her well pump is broken. A new one from the store is a cost she cannot afford. She doesn't ask for help, but you see the quiet panic in her eyes. You, along with another neighbor, go over with your tools. You spend the afternoon working together, improvising a repair with spare parts and ingenuity. When you finally get the pump working again, drawing up a bucket of clean, life-giving water, her relief is palpable. She thanks you not with flowery words, but with a simple, tired nod and a promise of a freshly baked loaf of bread. In that moment, you see the true nature of the Western woman. Not a saint, not the sinner, but a survivor. A pragmatic, resilient, and incredibly tough individual who is holding her world together with grit and determination. The men might be the ones getting into shootouts and gold rushes, but it's the women, you realize, who are quietly and steadily turning this raw, wild land into a place called home. As you continue to carve out your existence on your 160-acre plot, you become more aware of the people who were here long before the Homestead Act, before the railroad, before the first white settlers. You start to see the West not as an empty land that was settled, but as a homeland that was conquered. You begin to see it through another set of eyes, the eyes of the Native Americans. Occasionally, you see them from a distance, a small band of Cheyenne or Arapaho on horseback, moving silently across the plains. They are not the fearsome warriors of the dime novels. They look impoverished, their movements suggesting not a proud hunting party, but a people displaced, searching for a place to be. Your neighbors speak of them with a mixture of fear and contempt, calling them savages or redskins. But you also hear whispers of the treaties that were signed and then broken, of the promises of land and resources that were never honored. The world you are helping to build is directly responsible for the destruction of theirs. Your 160-acre farm, multiplied by thousands, is carving up the open range they depended on. The fences you and your neighbors are putting up, especially the new, viciously effective barbed wire, are severing the ancient migratory roots of the buffalo, the animal that was the absolute center of their universe. The buffalo provided them with food, shelter from hides, tools from bones, and spiritual sustenance. The systematic slaughter of the buffalo, encouraged by the government and accelerated by the railroad, was not just an ecological disaster, It was a deliberate strategy to subdue the plains tribes by destroying their primary food source. You are living on land that was, until very recently, there's the U.S. government's policy towards Native Americans during this period was a confusing and often contradictory mix of assimilation, removal, and outright warfare. The official goal was often civilization, forcing Native Americans to abandon their traditional cultures and become farmers on small, individual plots of land, just like you. This policy, formalized in the Dawes Act of 1887, was a complete failure. It misunderstood and disrespected every aspect of Native American social structure, land use, and spirituality. The question of how to interpret this period of history is one of the most contentious in American scholarship. Was it an unavoidable clash of cultures, a tragic but inevitable consequence of westward expansion, or was it a calculated campaign of ethnic cleansing and cultural genocide for a long time? The dominant narrative, the one you grew up with, was the former, but in recent decades, historians have increasingly adopted the latter interpretation, focusing on the immense violence, broken promises, and devastating long-term consequences for Native peoples. The little-known aspect of this conflict was the role of Native American scouts and police. The U.S. Army often recruited men from one tribe to help them fight against another, exploiting old rivalries. Later, on the reservations, the government established Indian police forces, putting Native men in the difficult and often impossible position of enforcing the rules of their conquerors upon their own people. This created deep divisions within the tribes that sometimes persist to this day. One day, a small family group of man, the woman, and 2 children approaches your sadi. They are on foot and look weary and hungry. The man points to his mouth and makes a gesture for food. Your first instinct, born of the stories you've heard, is fear. You grip the handle of the axe near your door, but then you look at their faces. You see not hostility, but a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. You see the hollow look of hunger in the children's eyes. You hesitate. Then, you go inside and cut a large piece from your bacon slab and wrap it with a small portion of your cornmeal. You hand it to the man. He nods, a gesture of solemn, formal gravity. He says something in his own language, a language that sounds soft and ancient. Then they turn and walk away, disappearing back into the vastness of the prairie. Your neighbors would call you a fool. They would say you're encouraging them, that you're putting yourself at risk. But as you watch them go, you don't feel like a fool. You feel a deep and unsettling sense of shame. That bacon and cornmeal was a small price to pay for the 160 acres of their land that you now call your own. You look out at your plowed fields, at the straight lines you've carved into the ancient grasslands. For the first time, you see your homestead not just as a symbol of your own hard work and future, but as a symbol of someone else's profound and irreversible loss. The West, you realize, was never empty. It was emptied. Your gaze, once focused on the immediate struggles of your own homestead, continues to widen. You've seen the vital role of women and the tragic displacement of Native Americans. Now, as the railroad becomes a permanent fixture in your life, you start to notice the men who built it, specifically the Chinese laborers who seem to exist in a world entirely separate from your own. After the main construction passed through, a significant number of Chinese workers stayed on. They took jobs that no one else wanted, working as maintenance crews for the railroad, living in small, self-contained camps along the tracks. Others moved into the town, establishing small businesses that catered to their own community and, cautiously, to the wider public. You see a Chinese laundry, a small restaurant serving unfamiliar food, and a shop selling dried herbs and goods you don't recognize. These men are a visible and constant presence, yet they are treated as if they are invisible. You hear them referred to with derogatory slang. You see children mock their traditional Q hairstyles and different style of dress. They are the ultimate outsiders, separated by language, culture, and a wall of prejudice. Their story is a crucial, yet often intentionally forgotten, chapter of the West. The Chinese first came to America in large numbers during the California Gold Rush, where they were known as gumps and gold mountain seekers. Later, the Central Pacific Railroad, facing a severe labor shortage for its monumental task of building east from California, began hiring them by the thousands. They proved to be incredibly efficient and reliable workers, taking on the most treacherous jobs, such as chipping away at the granite cliffs of the Sierra Nevada and handling volatile nitroglycerin to blast tunnels. Their contribution was immense. It is not an exaggeration to say that the western half of the Transcontinental Railroad might not have been completed without them. Yet, their role was almost completely erased from the celebrations at the famous Golden Spike ceremony in 1816, which marked the completion of the railroad. The celebratory photographs conspicuously excluded the Chinese workers who had made it possible. This erasure is a topic that historians of Asian American history have worked hard to correct. They debate the motivations and experiences of these laborers. Were they coolies, a form of indentured servant with little freedom, or were they enterprising immigrants, sending remittances back home to their families in Guangdong province and hoping to one day return? Which the reality was a complex mixture. While not technically slaves, they often worked under harsh contracts and faced extreme exploitation and racism. A little known and fascinating aspect of their lives was the sophisticated social structure they created. They organized themselves based on their home districts in China, forming mutual aid societies called huaguan. These organizations functioned as a combination of social club, bank, and governance system, helping newcomers find jobs, settling disputes, and providing a sense of community in a hostile land. They created a parallel society that allowed them to survive, and in some cases thrive, despite the discrimination they faced. You witnessed this prejudice firsthand. One day in the general store, a Chinese man comes in to buy rice. He is polite and quiet, but a couple of out-of-work cowboys begin to taunt him, making fun of his accent and telling him to go back where he came from. The store owner, Abernathy, who is happy to take the man's money, says nothing. The Chinese man endures the abuse with a quiet, impenetrable dignity, completes his purchase, and leaves. The injustice of the scene leaves a sour taste in your mouth. These men had built the very railroad that brought the cowboys their jobs and Abernathy his goods, yet they were rated as less than human. This anti-Chinese sentiment would eventually curdle international policy, fueled by economic anxieties and racist demagoguery. The U.S. passed the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. It was the first law in American history to ban a specific ethnic group from immigrating to the country and becoming citizens. It institutionalized the prejudice you witness daily. Later that week, you tear your only good shirt while mending a fence. It's beyond your clumsy ability to repair. Remembering the sign in town, you take it to the Chinese laundry. The man inside is the same one you saw in the store. He takes your shirt, examines the tear, and quotes you a price of a few cents. You return a few days later. The shirt is not just patched, it's been meticulously cleaned, pressed, and the tear is so skillfully repaired it's barely visible. The craftsmanship is far beyond what you expected. You pay the man and try to offer a word of thanks, maybe even an awkward apology for what you witnessed in the store. But you don't have the words, and he likely wouldn't understand them anyway. He simply nods, his face betraying no emotion. As you leave with your perfectly restored shirt, you feel a sense of profound respect. These men were not just laborers, they were skilled artisans, entrepreneurs, and survivors. They were building their own version of the West, a quieter, more resilient one, right alongside your own, whether you and your neighbors chose to see it or not. Every so often, a ripple of fear and excitement passes through the town. A stagecoach has been robbed on the road to Deadwood, or a bank has been hit in a town 2 counties over. The name of some outlaw, Jesse James, of Billy the Kid, a younger brother, is whispered in the saloons. These figures, in the popular imagination, are romantic rebels, dashing highwaymen who defy a corrupt system. You, like everyone else, are morbidly fascinated by their exploits. But as you listen to the stories and the rumors, you start to piece together a different picture of the outlaw life. It's a picture that is less about daring adventure and more about desperation, discomfort, and a constant, gnawing fear. The life of an outlaw, you begin to suspect, is not a life you would ever want. Most outlaws were not noble anti-heroes. They were often just young, desperate men, frequently veterans of the Civil War, who were unable or unwilling to reintegrate into a peaceful society. Many came from impoverished backgrounds and saw crime as the only path to wealth or status. They were not master criminals with elaborate plans. Their robberies were often clumsy, violent, and surprisingly unsuccessful. For every successful bank heist, there were a dozen botched attempts that ended in a hail of gunfire and a posse in hot pursuit. The reality of their daily life was far from glamorous. It was a life lived on the run. They couldn't stay in towns for long. They slept outdoors, and hid in caves or remote, rough shelters. They were often cold, hungry, and sick. A simple toothache or a festering wound could be a death sentence, as they couldn't risk seeing a doctor. They were plagued by insects in the summer and frostbite in the winter. Their existence was a grim and lonely one, punctuated by moments of extreme terror. A little-known fact about some of the most famous outlaw gangs, like the James Younger Gang, is that they had a network of sympathizers, often family and friends from their home states, who would provide them with shelter, food, and information. This support network was crucial to their ability to evade capture for so long. They weren't just lone wolves, they were often the criminal arm of a disaffected community that felt wronged by the government and the banks. The debate among historians about the nature of these outlaws is interesting. Were they a form of social bandit, Robin Hood figures who were resisting an unjust economic system on behalf of the common people? This is the romantic view. Or were they simply violent, sociopathic criminals, preying on the innocent and creating chaos for their own selfish gain? The evidence suggests that the latter is much closer to the truth. Though the former narrative was often promoted by sensationalist newspapers and the outlaws themselves, they were masters of public relations, cultivating a myth that was far more appealing than the so-or-do-I reality. One day, a posse rides into town. They are a grim-faced, heavily armed group of men, led by a U.S. Marshal. They are tracking a pair of horse thieves. They stop for supplies and information, and their presence casts a pall over the town. These are not heroic lawmen, they are tired, angry hunters. They tack up a WANTED poster on the wall of the sheriff's office. You go over to look at it. The poster offers a reward of $200 a fortune to you for 2 men, dead or alive. The descriptions are vague, and the sketches are crude, amateurish drawings that could be almost anyone. You realize how easy it would be for an innocent person to be mistaken for a wanted man in this environment of fear and high stakes. Later that week, the posse returns. They have 2 bodies slung over a pack mule. A crowd gathers as they unload the grim cargo and lay the 2 men out in the dust in front of the jail. They are the horse thieves. They are not dashing figures. They are young, barely out of their teens, and their clothes are ragged. Their faces, frozen in death, are ones of fear and desperation. There is no glory here, just a pathetic, bloody end to a short and brutal career. The marshal collects his bounty money, and the posse rides out, leaving the town to deal with the bodies. You look at the 2 dead men in the dust. You think about the $200 reward. You think about the cold nights, the constant hunger, and the fear they must have lived with. You think about their clumsy attempt at crime that ended here, in the dirt of a town they'd probably never even seen before. The romantic myth of the outlaw shatters completely. It's not a life of freedom. It's a life of running, of hiding, and, most likely, of dying young and alone, far from home. You turn and walk back to your soddy. The image of the two dead boys burned into your mind. You have never been more grateful for your boring, difficult, but honest life. Life on your homestead settles into a rhythm, dictated by the seasons and the endless list of chores. It's a hard life, a quiet life, and sometimes an intensely boring life. After the sun goes down, the darkness and silence are absolute. There is no electricity, no gas lamps lighting the streets, no bustling city nightlife. This raises a fundamental question of daily existence. What did people do for fun? How did they entertain themselves in a world without radios, movies, or the internet? You discover that entertainment in the West was something you had to make for yourself. It was often simple, communal, and eagerly anticipated. In town, the saloon, for all its grime, remains a primary hub for social interaction. A game of checkers or a heated political argument over a shared newspaper could be the main event of the evening. But the real heart of community entertainment was the social. When a new church was built or a schoolhouse was completed, the whole settlement would turn out for a box social or a potluck supper. Families would travel for miles, dressed in their Sunday best. It was a chance to share food, catch up on gossip, and, most importantly, for the young, unmarried people to meet and court under the watchful eyes of the community. The box social was a particularly charming and strategic event. Women would decorate a box and fill it with a picnic lunch for two. These boxes were then auctioned off to the men, with the woman's identity kept secret. The man who bought the box won the privilege of sharing the meal with the woman who made it. It was a combination of fundraiser, matchmaking service, and community feast. Music was a vital thread in the social fabric. If someone in the community owned a fiddle or a banjo, they were a local celebrity. A barn dance was a joyous, energetic affair. The furniture would be cleared from a barn, the floor swept, and lanterns hung from the rafters. The fiddler would strike up a tune, and the whole community, from young children to old grandparents, would join in reels and square dances. These nights were a boisterous, sweaty, and desperately needed release from the drudgery of daily life. For more solitary entertainment, reading was a precious luxury. Books were scarce and expensive. A single copy of a novel, perhaps by Charles Dickens or Sir Walter Scott, would be passed from family to family until its pages were often worn. Newspapers and magazines from the East were weeks, or even months out of date by the time they arrived, but they were read from cover to cover, providing a vital link to the wider world. The rise of cheap dime novels, with their sensationalized tales of the West, was a hugely popular phenomenon. It's a fascinating historical irony as you are living the tedious reality. You might be reading a wildly inaccurate, romanticized version of a life just like your own. A strange and little-known form of entertainment was the traveling medicine show. These were not just about selling dubious tonics. They were elaborate performances. A charismatic professor would roll into town in a colorful wagon, set up a small stage, and put on a show with music, comedy sketches, and sometimes even a small circus act to draw a crowd. After dazzling the audience, he would launch into his sales pitch for Drive, Good Times Miracle Elixir, guaranteed to cure everything from baldness to melancholy. Historians debate whether the audience was truly duped or if they simply saw the price of the bottle as a fair ticket price for a rare and welcome evening of entertainment. One evening, you decide to attend a dance being held in a neighbor's newly finished barn. You scrub the dirt from under your fingernails, put on your one clean shirt, the one repaired at the Chinese laundry, and walk the miles to their homestead. The barn is alive with light and laughter. The sound of a fiddle cuts through the cool night air. You see faces you recognize from town, from neighboring claims. For the first time, you feel like you are part of a community. You are awkward at first, standing on the sidelines, but then a neighbor's daughter, a young woman you've only ever seen from a distance, asks you to dance. You stumble through a square dance, laughing at your own mistakes. The energy is infectious. You share a cup of cider. You talk about the prospects for the wheat harvest. You complain about the grasshoppers. It's simple. It's real. As you walk home late that night under a canopy of brilliant stars, the sound of the fiddle still echoing in your ears, you feel a sense of contentment you haven't felt since you arrived in this land. It's not the thrill of finding gold or the pride of owning land. It's the simple, human joy of connection. You realize that entertainment here isn't about consumption. It's about participation. It's about creating small islands of lightened laughter in the vast, silent darkness. And in that, you find a kind of fun that is more profound and more memorable than any show you could ever buy a ticket for. The dance was a wonderful, but rare, exception to your isolated life. The profound silence and distance that define your existence on the homestead often make you feel disconnected from everything and everyone. You begin to grapple with a problem that is almost inconceivable to a modern mind: the crushing slowness of communication. In a world without a Wi-Fi signal, without a telephone, without even a reliable postal service, news travels at the speed of a horse. Your primary link to the world you left behind is the mail. The railroad brought the mail closer, but it's still an imperfect and sluggish system. A letter from your family back east is a precious, almost sacred object. It might take weeks, or even a month, to reach you. You have to go into town to the general store, which doubles as the post office, to see if anything has arrived. More often than not, there's nothing for you. When a letter does arrive, its news is already history. You might read about a family wedding that happened 3 weeks ago, or learn of an illness that has, for better or worse, already run its course. The letter is a snapshot of a moment that has long since passed. You write back, describing your new life, your struggles with the land, the progress on your soddy, and then you wait another month or two for a reply. This time lag creates a strange emotional distance, a feeling that you are living in a different timeline from the people you love. For more urgent news, there is a technological marvel that has spread across the country with the railroad, the telegraph. The talking wire is a miracle of the age. It can transmit a message across the continent in a matter of minutes. But it is not a tool for casual conversation. It is incredibly expensive. You are charged by the word, so messages are stripped down to their bare essentials, creating a clipped, impersonal form of communication known as telegram style. IRIVINGT UDSTAYSTOPMEDTRIINSTOP. You only use the telegraph for the most dire emergencies or the most critical business transactions. Going to the telegraph office in the trained EPO, you watch the operator tap out messages in a series of clicks and beeps Morse code. It's a specialized skill, a form of magic that translates human language into electrical pulses. This technology was revolutionary, but it was not personal. You couldn't hear a person's voice or see their handwriting. It was communication reduced to pure, costly information. The question of how this communication lag affected the psychology of settlers is something that preoccupies social historians. Did the slow pace of news foster a greater sense of independence and self-reliance, or did it exacerbate feelings of loneliness and isolation, contributing to the prairie madness that afflicted so many? It was likely a combination of both. You become fiercely self-reliant because you have to be no one can reach you in time to help, but you also feel the ache of that disconnection in your quietest moments. A little known and fascinating aspect of frontier communication was the use of newspapers to find lost relatives. In an age of mass migration and westward movement, it was common for families to lose track of one another. Newspapers across the country ran information wanted ads. Information wanted of John Sullivan, who left Ireland in 1865. Last heard from in street. Lewis, his sister Mary is anxious to hear from him. These small, poignant messages were a public cry into the void. a desperate hope of reconnecting in a vast and disconnected nation. One day, you receive a telegram. The sight of the yellow envelope with your name on it makes your heart pound. Telegrams rarely bring good news. You open it with trembling hands. The message is short and brutal. Your father, back east, is gravely ill. FDT RDDTL INGSTOPCOME IFYOUCA NSTOP. You stand there, the flimsy piece of paper in your hand, 1,000 miles of railroad track separating you from your family. Come if you can. The journey would take a week by train. A week you might not have. It would cost a small fortune. Money you've painstakingly saved from your first meager harvest. You are faced with an agonizing choice. A choice dictated by the tyranny of distance and the slowness of travel. You decide you must go. You rush to make arrangements, asking your neighbor to look after your livestock. You pack a small bag and head to the train station. As you wait for the next eastbound train, you stare at the telegraph key, at the wire stretching out across the prairie until it disappears into the horizon. It brought you the news with miraculous speed, but it could not bridge the physical gap. It could transmit the words, but it couldn't transport you. In this moment, you feel the full, crushing weight of living in a world without instant connection. You are connected by a thin, fragile wire, but you are still terrifyingly, heartbreakingly far away. You return from your journey east weeks later, your heart heavy with family matters. As the train carries you back towards your homestead, you notice a profound and disturbing change in the landscape. The great, shaggy herds of American bison, or buffalo, which had once been a common and awe-inspiring sight on the plains, are gone. The land feels emptier, stripped of a vital presence. In town, the change is even more apparent. Huge stacks of dried buffalo hides are piled high near the train depot, waiting for shipment to the tanneries in the east. The air is thick with the foul, sweetish odor of decay. You see rough-looking men, hide hunters, in the saloon, spending their money as fast as they earn it. They speak in grimly practical terms about stands, where they could kill dozens, sometimes hundreds, of animals in a single day without moving. You are witnessing the final act of one of the greatest wildlife tragedies in American history, the near extermination of the American buffalo in the early 19th century. An estimated 30 to 60 million buffalo roamed the Great Plains. By the late 1880s, only a few hundred remained. This was not a gradual decline. It was a systematic, commercial slaughter that took place with shocking speed, largely in the decade of the 1870s. Several factors converged to make this possible. The new tanning methods developed in the East created a massive industrial demand for tough buffalo leather, perfect for machine belts and boots. The railroad provided the means to transport the heavy hides to market quickly and efficiently. The new, powerful, long-range rifles, like the 50 caliber Sharps rifle, allowed hunters to kill with an efficiency that was previously unimaginable. The hide hunters were not sportsmen. They were professionals in an extractive industry. They would find a herd, set up their rifle on a tripod, and begin shooting, often targeting the lead cow. The other buffalo, confused and strangely reluctant to abandon their fallen leader, would mill about, allowing the hunter to pick them off one by one. It was less a hunt and more an industrial killing floor. They took only the hide, and sometimes the tongue, which was considered a delicacy. The rest of the massive carcass was left to rot on the prairie. The waste was staggering. This slaughter had a clear, if sometimes unstated, political dimension. U.S. government and military officials saw the destruction of the buffalo as a two-love policy. General Philip Sheridan famously, and perhaps apocryphal lie, was said to have remarked, "Let them kill, skin and sell until the buffalo is exterminated, as it is the only way to bring lasting peace and allow civilization to advance." By destroying the primary resource of the plains tribes, they were destroying their ability to resist. forcing them onto reservations and into dependency. The question for historians is not if this was a deliberate strategy, but to what degree it was officially coordinated. The consensus is that, while there may not have been a single written order, the military actively encouraged the slaughter and did nothing to stop it. A strange and little-known byproduct of this carnage was the bone-picking industry that followed. After the hunters had moved on, impoverished settlers, including many homesteaders like you, would go out onto the prairie and collect the millions of sun-bleached buffalo bones. These bones were then shipped east to be ground into fertilizer and used in the production of fine bone china. For a few years, buffalo bones were one of the biggest export products of states like Kansas and Nebraska. It was a grim harvest, gathering the remains of a continent's lost herds. You walk to the edge of town, where a shallow creek runs. The water is murky, fouled by the runoff from the hide curing operations. The smell is overwhelming. You look out across the plains, the same plains where just a few years ago you saw vast, moving seas of brown. Now there is nothing. A profound silence has fallen over the land. You feel a sense of complicity. The railroad you rely on, the town you live in, the very homestead you are trying to build, they are all part of the same system that orchestrated this destruction. The buffalo were an obstacle to progress, to the neat fences and plowed fields of your new world, and so they were removed. The disappearance of the is more than just the loss of an animal. It's the end of an entire ecosystem. It's the final, brutal severing of the plains tribes from their traditional way of life. It's a haunting symbol of the West's transformation from a wild, shared space into a managed, divided, and strangely diminished one. The silence they left behind is a heavy one, filled with the ghosts of what has been lost. The demise of the buffalo and the confinement of the Native American tribes to reservations have solidified the dominance of your new civilization. The land is now open for business. But one final, epic conflict remains to be settled, not with guns, but with wire. It's the war between the cattle ranchers, whose vast herds roam free, and the homesteaders like you, who want to protect their precious crops. And the weapon that will decide this war is a simple, cheap, and brutally effective invention: barbed wire. For years, the open range has been the domain of the cattlemen. Their business model depends on a vast, unfenced sea of grass, land that is technically public, but which they control through custom and intimidation. Your 160-acre farm is a direct threat to their way of life. Their cattle, which are not known for respecting property lines, wander into your fields and devour or trample your painstakingly cultivated corn and wheat. A single herd can wipe out a year's worth of your labor in a single night. You need a fence, but fencing the vast spaces of the plains is a monumental challenge. There is no wood for split rail fences. Building a stone wall is unthinkable. Smooth wire fences can't hold back a half-ton steer. This problem, the lack of a viable fencing material, has been the single biggest obstacle to agriculture on the plains. Then, in 1874, a man named Joseph Glidden patents a design for what he calls barbed wire. It's a simple concept of strands of wire twisted together, with sharp barbs locked into the twists. It's cheap to manufacture, easy to ship on the railroad, and can be strung up quickly on a few wooden posts. The cattle, after a few painful encounters, learn to respect it. It is not an exaggeration to say that this simple invention is what finally tames the West. Salesmen call it the devil's rope, a nickname that is both a marketing slogan and, for the cattlemen, a bitter truth. You save up your money and buy your first spools of this new wire from the general store. You spend weeks stringing it around the perimeter of your homestead. It's nasty work. The barbs tear at your hands and clothes, but as you hammer in the last staple, you feel a profound sense of security for the first time. Your land is now truly your own, a clearly defined, protected space. The cattle ranchers are furious. Your fence, and thousands of others like it that are springing up across the plains, are carving up their open range. They cut off access to water sources in traditional grazing lands. The era of the great, long-distance cattle drive is coming to a swift and decisive end. There is no way to drive a herd of 3 Zoro cattle through a landscape crisscrossed with barbed wire. This leads to the fence wars, a period of low-level, often violent conflict between the homesteaders or nesters, as the cattlemen contemptuously call them on the big ranching outfits. At night, crews of cowboys ride out with wire cutters, snipping the fences of the farmers. In retaliation, homesteaders sometimes take shots at the fence cutters or the cattle. It's a bitter, nasty struggle over the future of the West. The question of whether barbed wire was a tool of progress or an instrument of oppression is a classic historical debate. For the small farmer, it was a godsend, the key to agricultural success. It promoted a vision of the West based on private property, small-scale farming, and community. For the cattle barons and the cowboys, it was a destructive force that ended their freedom and their economic model. It represented the triumph of a settled, agrarian society over a nomadic, pastoral one. A little known and dark side of the barbed wire revolution was its use by large, wealthy ranchers against each other and against smaller homesteaders. In a practice known as fencing the public domain, massive ranching corporations would illegally fence off hundreds of thousands of acres of public land, including vital water sources, for their exclusive use, effectively starving out their smaller competitors. The devil's rope became a tool for creating monopolies. One morning, you wake up to find that a section of your fence has been cut during the night. Your heart sinks. It's a message. Day warning. You spend the day repairing the wire, your hands bleeding, your mind filled with a mixture of fear and angry defiance. This land is yours by law. You have the piece of paper to prove it. That evening, you sit on your small porch, your shotgun across your lap, watching the sun go down. You are guarding your fence. You are guarding your corn. You are guarding your future. The war for the West, you realize, isn't being won in dramatic battles. It's being won here, in these quiet, tense vigils, by thousands of small farmers like you, armed with a deed, a shotgun, and a few spools of viciously sharp wire. The open range is dying, one fence post at a time. They knew, more orderly, and more confined West is being born. Years have passed. Your soddy has been replaced by a small, neat frame house, built with lumber brought in on the train. Your fields are productive. Your fences are secure, and the town has grown. It now has a proper school, 2 churches, and even a small brick bank. The raw, wild frontier you first encountered is fading into memory, replaced by something that looks a lot more like the East you left behind. The West, as a distinct and untamed place, is closing. Then right on cue, a new industry emerges to sell the myth of the very thing that is disappearing. You see posters plastered all over town for a spectacular traveling show, Buffalo Bill's Wild West. The name on the poster is William F. Cody, a man who was once a real Army scout and buffalo hunter, but has now transformed himself into a master showman. His show promises to bring the authentic West to the world, complete with real cowboys, real Indians including, for a time, the famous chief, Sitting Bull, and thrilling reenactments of famous battles and stagecoach robberies. You, along with most of the town, attend the show when it comes to a nearby city. It's an incredible spectacle. In a huge outdoor arena, you see cowboys perform amazing feats of horsemanship and marksmanship. You see a dramatic and wildly inaccurate recreation of Custer's Last Stand. You see an Oakley, the little sure shot, perform unbelievable trick shots with a rifle. It's exciting, it's heroic, and it is almost entirely a performance. It's a carefully curated and highly romanticized version of the West, packaged for popular consumption. This is the birth of the Western myth, the one that will dominate movies and television for the next century. It's a myth of simple heroism, of clear good versus evil, of noble cowboys and savage Indians, It smooths over all the rough edges you know to be true. There's no mention of the crushing boredom of a cattle drive, the filth of a frontier town, the back-breaking labor of a homesteader, or the tragedy of the broken treaties. Buffalo Bill is selling a thrilling fantasy, and the nation, eager for a heroic origin story, is buying it. The question of Buffalo Bill's legacy is a complicated one for historians. Was he a charlatan who exploited his employees, especially the Native American performers, and sold a lie to the public? Or was he a brilliant entrepreneur who captured the spirit of an era and, in his own way, preserved some of its skills and stories before they vanished completely? Some argue that he provided a strange, post-conquest employment opportunity for Native performers, allowing them to travel and maintain some of their cultural practices, albeit in a theatrical context. Others see it as the final, humiliating commodification of their culture. The truth is, as always, uncomfortably in the middle. A lesser-known but equally important force in creating the myth was the dime novel. These cheap, sensational paperbacks were the mass-market entertainment of their day. Writers back in New York City, who had often never been west of the Mississippi, churned out hundreds of stories about heroic figures like Deadwood Dick and Calamity Jane. These characters were loosely based on real people, but their adventures were pure fiction, filled with impossible gunfights, hidden gold mines, and daring rescues. These novels created the archetypes that Buffalo Bill would then bring to life on his stage. After the show, you walk through the crowded Midway. You see vendors selling cheap souvenirs. You overhear people from the city talking excitedly about the real West they've just witnessed. You feel a strange sense of dislocation. The life that you have lived, with all its hardship, monotony, and moral complexity, has been transformed into a simple, thrilling cartoon. You think back to your journey in the prairie schooner, the taste of alkali water, the crushing loneliness of your first sati. You think of the quiet dignity of the Chinese laundryman, the weary look on the sheriff's face, the tragic end of the young outlaws, and the haunting silence left by the vanished buffalo. None of that is in the show. You have survived. You have endured the reality. But as you watch the crowds cheer for the performance, you realize that the reality doesn't matter anymore. The myth is more powerful. It's simpler. It's more exciting. And it's easier to sell. The real Wild West, the one you knew, is dead. And this spectacular, noisy, and wonderfully fake show is the ghost that will haunt America for generations to come. You have lived through an era, and now you are watching it become a legend. The sun begins to set on your small farm, casting long, soft shadows across the fields you've worked for so many years. The air cools, then the familiar, gentle sounds of the evening settle in the chirp of crickets, the low murmur of your livestock in the bog, the distant whistle of a train, which is no longer a sound of intrusion, but one of comforting regularity. You sit on your porch, a place you built with your own hands, and look out over a life you have carved from the unyielding land. The journey feels like a lifetime ago, a dream of dust and hardship, the memory of the heaving wagon, the taste of gritty coffee, the untamed horizon. It all softens in the twilight of your memory. The sharp edges of fear and loneliness have been worn smooth by the passing of time, leaving behind a quiet sense of accomplishment. You are no longer the frightened newcomer, the desperate job seeker, the weary homesteader. You are a survivor. You are a fixture in the landscape, as rooted as the fence posts that mark your land. As the last sliver of sun disappears, the first stars begin to appear in the deep, dark sky. They are the same stars you once looked up at from beneath a wagon, feeling small and lost. Tonight, they look different. They look like old friends, silent witnesses to your long and quiet story. The wind whispers through the corn, a gentle, lulling sound. Your thoughts begin to drift, to float away from the hard ground of memory and into the softer landscape of sleep. The day's work is done, the land is quiet, and you, a settler of this once Wild West, can finally rest. The end of the article. Good night.